I have studied reserve currency transitions for decades, and I can tell you with high confidence that we are witnessing the beginning of the end of dollar dominance. This is not a sudden collapse scenario. Reserve currencies do not disappear overnight, but they do lose their privileged status over time through a process that accelerates once it begins. The BRICS expansion and their efforts to build alternative financial systems represent the most serious challenge to dollar hegemony since Bretton Woods established it in 1944. Understanding what is happening requires understanding what reserve currency status actually means and why it matters. When your currency is the global reserve, other countries hold it in their central bank reserves, conduct international trade in it, and price commodities in it. This creates extraordinary advantages. You can borrow in your own currency at lower rates than economic fundamentals would otherwise allow. You can run persistent trade deficits without immediate consequences because other countries need your currency to function. You can weaponize financial access through sanctions because everyone depends on your banking systems. These privileges are worth trillions of dollars over time. The United States has enjoyed this position since World War II, but that position depended on specific conditions that no longer exist. American economic dominance was overwhelming in 1945. The U.S. produced half of global GDP. No other major economy was even close. The dollar was backed by gold at a fixed rate, which provided credibility. American military power protected global trade routes. Political stability and rule of law made dollar assets safe. These advantages created a self-reinforcing cycle where dollar dominance led to more dollar demand, which reinforced dominance. Those conditions have changed fundamentally. The U.S. now produces roughly 15% of global GDP, not 50%. The dollar has not been backed by gold since 1971. American political dysfunction is visible globally. Military overextension has created vulnerabilities. The fiscal situation with over $35 trillion in debt raises questions about long-term sustainability. Meanwhile, alternatives have emerged that did not exist during the Cold War. China's economy now rivals America's in purchasing power terms. Its manufacturing capacity exceeds the United States, Europe, and Japan combined. It runs trade surpluses, not deficits, which means it accumulates reserves rather than borrowing. It has built technological capacity that no longer depends entirely on Western systems. And critically, it has created financial infrastructure that allows countries to reduce dollar dependence gradually. The BRICS expansion signals that this is not just about China. BRICS originally included Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. In 2024, it expanded to include Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the United Arab Emirates. More than 40 countries have expressed interest in joining or partnering. This is not a random collection of nations. Collectively, they represent over 40% of global population and roughly 30% of global GDP. More importantly, they represent a desire to operate outside Western-dominated financial systems. The motivations for joining BRICS vary by country, but certain themes appear consistently. Many have faced or fear Western sanctions and want alternatives to dollar-based systems where American political decisions can cut off their financial access. Others resent the privilege that reserve currency status gives the United States, allowing it to finance deficits by printing money while they must earn dollars through trade. Some see multipolarity as preferable to unipolarity, regardless of who dominates. All recognize that building alternatives requires collective action because no single country can challenge dollar dominance alone. The practical steps BRICS is taking matter more than rhetoric. They established the new development bank as an alternative to the World Bank and IMF. While smaller, it provides financing without the political conditions Western institutions impose. They created the contingent reserve arrangement, a pool of currency reserves members can access during crises without going to the IMF. They are developing payment systems that bypass SWIFT, which the West uses to enforce sanctions. Most significantly, they are working on arrangements to conduct trade in local currencies rather than dollars. China and Russia already settle significant bilateral trade in yuan and rubles. Saudi Arabia, traditionally a cornerstone of the petrodollar system, has agreed to accept yuan for oil sales to China. This is not replacing dollars entirely, but it creates precedent and infrastructure that makes dollar alternatives viable where they were not before. The discussion of a common BRICS currency deserves scrutiny because it is both overstated and understated in different ways. There will not be a single BRICS currency that replaces the dollar globally in the near term. The member countries have too many divergent interests and economic structures for that to work. But that is not what they need to achieve their goal. They do not need to replace the dollar. They only need to reduce dependence on it enough that American financial leverage becomes less decisive. What is more likely is a basket or platform approach where BRICS currencies are used for trade settlement, with exchange rates managed through a common mechanism, possibly backed partially by gold or commodities. This would allow countries to trade with each other without converting through dollars, reducing transaction costs and American visibility into trade flows. Even if this system only captured 20% of global trade initially, that would represent a massive shift in dollar demand and American influence. The role of gold in this system is important. Central banks globally have been net buyers of gold for over a decade, with accelerating purchases recently. Russia and China in particular have dramatically increased their gold reserves. Gold provides a neutral reserve asset that no single country controls, making it useful for backing a multi-currency system where trust in any one nation's currency is limited. A partially gold-backed BRICS settlement system would combine the flexibility of fiat currencies with the credibility of commodity backing. Digital currencies add another layer. China's digital yuan is already operational domestically and being tested internationally. A digital currency can facilitate cross-border transactions more efficiently than traditional banking systems, and it operates outside Western financial infrastructure. If BRICS members adopt interoperable digital currency systems, they could create a parallel financial network that bypasses not just the dollar, but the entire Western banking architecture. The timeline for this transition is measured in years and decades, not months. Reserve currency transitions historically take 20 to 50 years from beginning to completion. Sterling's decline as reserve currency began during World War I, but was not complete until the 1970s. The dollar's rise started in the 1920s, but was not dominant until after World War II. These are slow processes that involve countless individual decisions by governments, businesses, and investors gradually shifting behavior. But slow does not mean reversible. Once the process begins and infrastructure for alternatives exists, each step becomes easier. The first country to accept yuan for oil took a risk. The 10th country doing it is following precedent. The network effects that built dollar dominance work in reverse during decline. As more countries use alternatives, those alternatives become more liquid and attractive, which encourages more adoption, which makes them more useful, creating a self-reinforcing cycle downward for dollar share. Several factors accelerate this process. The weaponization of the dollar through sanctions taught every country that dollar dependence is a vulnerability. When the U.S. froze Russian central bank reserves in 2022, it sent a message to every other nation. Your reserves are only safe if your policies align with Washington. This creates powerful incentive to diversify, even for countries that are currently aligned with the U.S. but fear future policy shifts. Persistent American fiscal deficits and debt accumulation raise questions about the dollar's long-term value. If the U.S. continues running deficits exceeding $1 trillion annually while debt compounds faster than growth, Eventually, confidence in the dollar's purchasing power will erode. Countries holding dollar reserves will see their value decline through inflation, creating incentive to hold other assets. The political dysfunction visible in American governance concerns foreign observers. Reserve currency status requires trust that the issuing country will maintain stability and honor commitments across administrations. When policy swings wildly every 4 to 8 years, when debt ceiling crises threaten default, when allies cannot predict whether agreements will be honored after elections, that trust diminishes. Stability and predictability matter for reserve assets, and America increasingly provides neither. The practical implications for individuals and investors are significant. If dollar dominance erodes over the next 10 to 20 years, everything priced and denominated in dollars will be affected. The U.S. will face higher borrowing costs as demand for Treasury bonds decreases. Import prices will rise as the dollar weakens relative to other currencies. The ability to finance deficits cheaply will disappear, forcing difficult fiscal choices that are currently postponed. Asset allocation must account for this possibility. Holding all wealth in dollar-denominated assets exposes you to currency risk that was minimal when dollar dominance seemed permanent but becomes material as alternatives emerge. Diversification across currencies makes sense, though predicting which currencies will gain share is difficult. The yuan seems obvious given China's size, but capital controls and government intervention limit its attractiveness. The euro has problems, but benefits from representing a large economic bloc. Gold serves as a neutral hedge that benefits from any currency instability. Geographic diversification also matters. Some regions will integrate more closely with dollar systems, others with yuan or BRICS systems, and some will maintain flexibility between both. Understanding which regions are likely to fall into which camp helps position investments appropriately. Southeast Asia will remain balanced between U.S. and Chinese influence. Europe will try to maintain independence but may lack the capacity. Latin America is increasingly open to Chinese investment and BRICS participation. Africa is already heavily influenced by Chinese infrastructure and financing. The transition will not be smooth. There will be periods of stress where the old system breaks down before the new system is fully operational. Currency volatility will increase. Trade flows will be disrupted. Countries will make strategic errors, choosing wrong partners or timing transitions poorly. This creates both risks and opportunities for those who understand the dynamics. One scenario that concerns me is a currency crisis triggered by too rapid de-dollarization. If many countries try to reduce dollar reserves simultaneously, selling treasury bonds and converting dollars to other assets, it could create a self-fulfilling panic where the dollar's value drops sharply. This would be catastrophic for everyone, including those trying to diversify, because it would destroy enormous wealth held in dollar assets globally. The transition needs to be gradual enough that markets can adjust without panic. Another risk is fragmentation into competing currency blocks that do not interoperate. A dollar block, a yuan block, and a BRICS block that cannot easily trade with each other would reduce global economic efficiency and increase potential for conflict. The post-1945 system had one reserve currency that facilitated global trade. A multipolar monetary system requires more complex mechanisms and creates more friction. This is manageable, but represents a step backward from the integration achieved over the past 7 decades. The historical parallel that offers some comfort is that reserve currency transitions, while disruptive, do not necessarily cause civilizational collapse. Britain lost reserve currency status between the 1940s and 1970s, but it remained a prosperous, developed nation. The transition was painful, requiring austerity and adjustment, but the country adapted. The United States will face similar adjustment if dollar dominance ends, but it retains enormous advantages in technology, education, natural resources, and institutional quality that will persist regardless of currency status. What is not sustainable is the assumption that dollar dominance will continue indefinitely simply because it has existed for 70 years. All previous reserve currencies eventually lost that status, typically after 50 to 100 years of dominance. The dollar is now 80 years into its run. The conditions that established its dominance have changed. Alternatives are being built systematically. The incentives for diversification are strong and growing. The BRICS currency project is not a conspiracy or a sudden threat. It is a rational response by countries that see dollar dependence as a vulnerability and believe multipolarity serves their interests better than continued American monetary hegemony. Whether they succeed depends on execution, which is uncertain, and on continued American fiscal and political dysfunction, which unfortunately seems likely. For those positioned entirely in dollar assets, the question is not whether to diversify, but when and how. Waiting for certainty means waiting until the transition is obvious to everyone, at which point repositioning becomes expensive because asset prices have already adjusted. Moving too early means accepting costs and complexity for a transition that could take decades. The balance is maintaining enough dollar exposure to function in a system still largely dollar denominated, while holding enough alternatives to preserve wealth if dollar dominance erodes faster than expected. The BRICS challenge to dollar hegemony is real, structural, and accelerating. It does not require the dollar to disappear or even to become a minor currency. It only requires dollar share of global reserves and trade to decline from 70% to 40 or 30%. That change, which is already underway, fundamentally alters the calculus of American power and forces adjustments that current policy assumes can be indefinitely postponed. Those who understand this and position accordingly will navigate the transition successfully. Those who cling to assumptions based on permanent dollar dominance will discover that what seemed stable was actually a temporary historical condition that is now ending.